Welcome to the Alix Mayer Show. Today's guest, Dr. Michelle Perro, has worked in pediatrics for 45 years. She started out running a pediatric ER, and now, because of all the chronic health issues, she is an integrative medical doctor working on just chronic health issues in children because those are more prolific than emergency issues. She's a Yale-educated medical doctor who got her training at Mount Sinai, and she spent a lot of time at UCSF until she started to realize that these chronic issues required far more than the traditional medical system could ever allow. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with people who you think would benefit from this information. Welcome to the Alix Mayer Show. The Alix Mayer Show is sponsored by MISH International, gold and silver specialists since 1963. When you need protection from monetary inflation and leveraged assets exposure, you contact the dedicated people at MISH International. MISH International, a family business, offers true expertise, integrity, reliability, and fair pricing of gold and silver. Visit their website at mishinternational.com. That's MISH international.com. Dr. Michelle Perro, welcome to the Alix Mayer Show. It is my great pleasure to have you here today. I think we only met about a year ago, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you, and I'm really excited about your new book.
Alex, thank you. I've been a fan of yours for a while, following your work, a dedicated admirer. We're both local in the same Northern California area, so that's kind of cool. We can meet up, and my pleasure to join you.
Well, it's fantastic. And you've got just an incredible background. And today, people will describe you as an integrative medical doctor, perhaps a homeopath, but you didn't start out that way. And I like to get people's backstories because it really helps me understand how they got to where they are today. But most of this interview today is really going to be spent on your new book, which is about how we heal our children. But before we go to that, let's go to your background, and I want to hear about your candy striper days and other things like that. So take us through that.
Sure. So now that you mentioned candy striping, I love that. I was in theater first, and I went to the High School of the Performing Arts in New York City. I was hell-bent. But a couple of sidesteps happened, as life will deliver. I was hospitalized when I was a kid, when I was 12. It's a long story, but I got over it. And two candy striper friends came by, and when they came by to see me, just serendipitously, they were friends of mine, I saw those candy striper uniforms, and I just knew I needed to have that uniform. So after I got out of the hospital, I started volunteering in this little downtown hospital in New York City. It's now gone. It's called Beekman Downtown Hospital. And I was so precocious as a kid that they let me do everything. I was in Central Supply. I had the book cart. I was in pediatrics. I was setting up surgical trays. I was all over this hospital. But what happened was there was a shift. And then I loved being in the hospital. I loved working with patients. I loved the pediatric ward. So little did I, unbeknownst to me, it laid the foundation for my career. Fast forward, med school, pediatrics. I became a pediatric emergency physician first. I ran an ER, we started life support, all that stuff. Came out to Oakland Children's where I spent 10 years, met my husband, had my children, and then my own kid developed some stuff, as kids will do. Again, serendipity, knocking on my door. I met up with a wonderful MD homeopath, still practicing in the Bay Area, Dr. Ikenze. She's still a friend. And she told me what to give my son. A homeopathic remedy. And within 5 minutes, this remedy literally cleared my son.
That's what people say about homeopathy. That's incredible.
It was incredible. Happened again, did it again. Long story short, I was furious that here was this $5, it was $5 back then, remedy, sugar pills. My kid was sucking them down and cleared up my kid. I went back to school, became a homeopath, and started on this journey of integrative health. And eventually I left mainstream over several issues, but again, that was my journey and my foray, beginning with a personal story of my own kid who's now doing great.
Yeah. So how did you react to the homeopathy recommendation at first? Because right now it's used as a smear for all natural medicine. Like even if you're doing herbal medicine, somebody who doesn't know about it is going to try to smear it and be like, oh, you're just doing homeopathy that has nothing in it. And you just think, well, homeopathy is not an umbrella term for all natural medicine. I mean, that's somebody who's really uninformed, right? Were you that person at that time?
No, I'm a curious learner. So I've always been curious, and I've never been one to say, oh, that's horrible. But when I heard this homeopathy and that there was another healing mechanism, I just knew how little I knew. I was uncomfortably aware of that fact throughout my whole career, even though I'm super highly educated. I went to Yale, I went to Mount Sinai, I trained at Bellevue, NYU. I was at like these heavy hitting institutions, but I always felt like I can learn more. There is more out there for me to grasp. The amount of eye rolling that I received, especially 30 years ago when I became a homeopath, I could travel around the world with all the rolling that happened over the course of my career. The jokes, endless jokes between coming off gluten and dairy, becoming a homeopath, talking about GMOs in food. I think I was the brunt of jokes for a few decades. Fortunately, I have tough New York skin, sort of big heart, tough skin. And I'm going to tell you, Alex, it wasn't easy. I remember doing a grand rounds on homeopathy with the same Dr. Kenze at our local hospital here in my county. And we were literally, I think they throwing tomatoes at us off the stage.
Literally?
I mean,
No, wait, you literally had people throw tomatoes.
Well, they would have. So I think that's a metaphor. But there was so much venom coming at us that I thought, oh dear, this is so not good. But okay, one job, I'll give you a quick vignette. One job, I didn't do well. I gave a kid a remedy. The pediatrician reported me, and lo and behold, my boss, he said, you can't do that, and I quit. That same boss was at a party at my house. He was having some health challenges, urgent ones at my house. There are my remedies. You can't see them. I said, may I offer you, names not mentioned, a remedy? He was better within 10 minutes. And he said, whoa, this stuff really does work.
That's an incredible story. So, and what I want to sit on this concept for a second before we move on to your books, but what is it about medical doctors where they're so dismissive of other healing modalities besides the pharmaceutical and patented medicine they've learned in medical school? And why do they denigrate these other methods? And is it dangerous for doctors to prescribe things other than patented medicine?
So I think, from my personal perch, I feel that it's a combination of factors. It's not one. Many doctors are kind of just geared into pharmaceutical training, right? We get a year of pharmacology, 1 year of learning every drug pathway known to man. So we literally become pharmacologists, and approximately 2 hours of nutrition. And that's changed a little bit now, especially with Bobby Kennedy's initiatives in medical school. So that is fortunately training. Oh, hallelujah. But then there's this arrogance that is developed. I don't know if people enter with arrogance or they learn to be arrogant regarding that we know all, you will do what we say, you will follow this prescription, we will not be challenged on our authority. And also what's happened to physicians in the model is that they've created about 20 years ago, it's been a while, clinical practice guidelines. So here are the guidelines. When you go outside of the guidelines, if there is an adverse outcome, which unfortunately there sometimes is, that will set you up for malpractice. So doctors are reticent to not follow the clinical practice guidelines, which are UTI, take amoxicillin, take Keflex, take a ciprofloxacin. You have asthma, you'll take albuterol, solumedrol, etc. There are these formulated algorithms that you have to have a lot of courage to step out of. So I think it's this combination kind of poo-poo platter that, we consume as physicians. Now, lastly, young doctors now are in serious debt. The average medical student debt is about $333,000. That's the last figure I read. So they become beholden to the system to get out of debt. I mean, they want a house, they want to raise families, and so they need to pay to play. And that is yet another factor which keeps them locked in the model, the narrative.
What percent of doctors, in your estimation, do you think are paying to play but actually know the truth about natural medicine and vaccine harms?
I'm going to say it's pretty small. I don't think they read outside much out of, this is my own opinion, not based on any data. I haven't researched this, but knowing a lot of doctors, I attend a lot of conferences, I give a lot of talks, but I don't do talks for mainstream so much. I'm not invited into the mainstream circle. My talks are mostly in the integrative space and natural medicine space. I would say less than 5%.
That's wild.
It changes when there are female doctors, they have children, and their kids are sick.
So you would say the preponderance of doctors who know about natural medicine are female and they've just had children?
And those children have issues.
So interesting. Yeah. And that's the thing, Dr. Perro, people have to have their own teaching moment to believe any of the stuff you're saying, right?
I'm humbled by what parents have had to go through, as particularly physician parents. But when it becomes personal, it becomes real. And it shouldn't have to be that way, that you have to go through this and your own kid has to develop autism or chronic asthma or, metabolic disruptions or hopefully not autoimmune disease, type 1 diabetes. It shouldn't have to be that, but that's what it often is. And when I do meet Mary D doctor, not other doctors at these conferences where I speak, they often have a sick kid and they'll come up to me. I get asked all the time, what do I do? What do I do? Constantly text, emails. People are at a loss of how you fix this because remember, mainstream physicians, pediatricians, family docs are not trained in how to deal with chronic complex issues. We are mostly trained. I'm still a mainstream physician, although I don't practice it, but in mostly acutes. So if you break your leg or have a heart attack, mainstream medicine is excellent. Chronic issues, not so good.
Not so much. Yeah, I found that out the hard way when I still believed in like the big institutions like Stanford when I first became disabled after my vaccines, and they don't know how to deal with chronic illness at all, and they still don't. They either fix it or you're crazy.
Right. It becomes a psychiatric issue as if your head is cut off at the neck. I'm like, hey guys, there's something called the gut brain microbiome axis and psychiatric problems. I like to think of them as neurologic problems. I don't even like the word psychiatric disorders. I believe many of the psychiatric health problems are actually gut derived and often require a gut forward, gut adjacent, gut thinking approach to deal with them, whether it's depression, anxiety, OCD, etc.
That makes total sense. Well, let's get into what does make people have those issues. That's the topic of your first book. And I know you had a jumping off point before you wrote that book. You had a child who was sick and was healed with homeopathy, and you were at UCSF, I think, at the time. And then you got into all of this wisdom about what is making our kids sick.
Yeah, so right, my own son did really well. And remember, 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, kids were not as sick as they are now because chronic disease in children keeps escalating. The poisoning of our food, vaccination numbers, geoengineering, and particulate matter in the air, water. It's just the toxic load is more than our kids can tolerate. So kids from my son's generation over 3 decades ago to kids now, they're much worse off. The degree of unhealthy kids now is even escalated. So when I wrote this first book, What's Making Our Children Sick, based on my patients, and I'll tell you a little bit about the work I do with my co-author, Dr. Adams, about 54% of children had a chronic disease. So that was based on a study from 2012. When I researched those numbers from my present book, I can't find a study that looked at all chronic diseases. Clinically, I suspect it's between 70 and 75%. That's between 2017. That's less than 10 years from my first book. And I can tell you stats on the rate of asthma or obesity or autoimmune disease in children. But a study looking at global chronic diseases, I have not found. I don't think they want to publish that data. They don't want it out there. So that journey, my co-author is a wonderful medical anthropologist at UCSF on the first book. And she was my neighbor and we were walking and talking. She was an author. I said, oh, I want to write a book. She said she'd help me. She did not believe, and she admits this in public, a word of what I had to say. So Dr. Adams from UCSF, and I think she's still practicing, came with me to my clinic and she sat in with my visits for over a year. It took us about 3 years to write that book. And by, I think, the 30th patient, she went, oh my God. She said, oh my God. I think it was the last family of 3 kids where the mom had 3 children, all with autism, kind of set her back. And then she believed and became a believer and even saw the issues in her own kids.
So she was primed to start believing over those 29 appointments before that 30th one. What was it in that 30th appointment with 3 kids with autism? What hit her?
I think I think it was the camel that broke the straw that broke the camel's back, because she had seen my patients with Lyme and autism and allergies and diabetes and you name it. And when she saw these three kids in my little room, I had a small pediatric office. I was working for the IHH at the time, which is the Institute for Health and Healing. It's an integrative clinic at Sutter, still going strong. It's a wonderful place. When those three kids were running around my room out of control, and that mom looked like utter hell, just like shell shocked, it hit her what it means and what it takes to get these kids better. And she also was present for, and I'll tell you this super brief vignette, had an autistic family from Modesto. They drove to see me from Modesto. The dad had chronic renal failure. He was on the dialysis list, 30 something years old. And he lived in the heart of spraying, of pesticide spraying. His mom and brother were both on dialysis. The kids got better from their autism. Both boys had it. My colleague saw it. Dad comes back 9 months later. My colleague saw it, and he had regained 80% of his kidney function after only going organic. Because organic prescriptions are number one in my approach dealing with any family. You have to change your diet off of pesticides and GMOs. GMOs are toxic.
Just summarize this for a second. I want to make sure that I get this. There is a man on dialysis in his 30s who lives in
Almost. He had 20%
20% kidney function, and he lives in an area of heavy spraying. So he's still exposed to that every day, but he went organic and he just wasn't eating all those pesticides, and he regained most.
He was a trucker, brought all his home food. His wife and he were very diligent about it, because I read them the Riot Act about getting their kids better and changing their diet. Now, he wasn't a patient. All he did was change his diet. And with the two boys with autism, I actually did a lot of things to get those boys better. It wasn't just a diet change. It takes a fair amount. It takes a fair amount of work, and it takes 1 year to 3 years, and kids can be reversed from autism. And that's all this dad did. And he was taking his little lunch boxes everywhere he went, driving across the country, and he regained kidney function. And when he went back to his UCSF doctor, that's where he was followed. She said 12 years in the kidney clinic. She said, and he told her, she said, "How did you do it?" And he said, "I went organic." And she said, "We must have misdiagnosed you."
You've got to be kidding. As if he never had a kidney problem in the first place.
I guess UCSF has a hard time diagnosing kidney failure is not really hard, because there's something on a metabolic panel, a lab test, that really is very good about showing you your kidney function. It's called BUN and creatinine for people who are interested. And his got better. You could just, there it was.
That's an incredible story, because you can be exposed to those pesticides all around you. But if you change your diet, which is within your control, you can totally change your body.
You can. And of course, it may take other things now, because the toxic load is increasing. And it's increased from geoengineering, the spraying, which we can talk or not talk about, and the number of vaccines, and of course, the COVID genetic immunomodulating injection. I can't even call that a vaccine. So that, unfortunately, is a new lens that we have to look at through people's health. And that wasn't around when I saw this gentleman, it was about 2017, maybe 2016. So things have changed quickly. Alex, it's super quick. And so now we have to relook at things through yet another lens.
So if you were to rewrite your book today about why our kids are sick, what are the top things you would say now?
So in making our children well, I focus on several things. So one is our food. GMOs, which are now GMOs 3.0, that's a problem, and they're associated pesticides. The average food has at least six pesticides, at least. Water. Our water is contaminated and also fluoridated in many counties here in California. About 73% of American water is fluoridated. Fluoride is a neurotoxin, and so it's in the water, unless you filter it out, which is not so easy. The air. So we got the food, the water, the air, the geoengineering, vaccines for sure, and the adjuvants that are in the toxicants, the toxic elements in the vaccines, as well as the COVID immunomodulating gene injection labeled as a therapy / vaccination. and external milieu, cleaning up kids' environments, whether we're talking about personal care products and household products. And unfortunately, electromagnetic frequencies are in the mix too, which I believe the EMFs, 5G, are driving an explosion of mold toxicity. So that's kind of a sidebar, but I would put EMFs in there. And during COVID, I was so alarmed about this, Alix, that I wrote a global children's environmental health bill of rights. And I put 7 things in there. And number 7, I edited it later, is social media. And now if I were to rewrite that, which I wish I had in my book, but it was already to print, I would do social media / AI.
Yep, it is creeping in there. I mean, they're even like counseling services that people can get through AI. Yeah, it's so personalized.
Yeah. So I don't know about, having your AI, help you give you therapy. Not something I would recommend. And I actually, not that I want to get into AI, but why not? I don't think any child should be on AI, period, not till college. I think we should keep all kids off AI because it really has been shown to decrease cognitive function.
Oh yeah, you don't need to think anymore for a lot of things. It's pretty crazy.
Right? It's crazy. And you lose your, it's learning about problem solving. That's why we go to school, is so we can learn to problem solve and how to think out things. And that's why you take geometry. It's not that you're going to become an engineer. It's so you can logically think about problem solving, whatever you decide to do, a barista or, a mathematician, whatever it is. So there is a capacity to be able to manage life. Otherwise, you'll have people who can't manage lives without their AI.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So let's get into these things that are making our kids sick. And your new book, tell us the whole title of your new book.
Yeah. So here's the proof. And it's just on Amazon like 2 days ago, Alix. Here it is, Making Our Children Well. Woohoo. And what I like to call is a parent's guidebook, and I'll tell you why. And this is empowering healthy families with nutrition and homeopathy. And what I did is I would prefer that people buy it in paperback. And why? Because I have lots of sections for notes, charts. People can use things. They can monitor their own kids' progress. They can monitor their dog's progress, their own progress. And as they write things down here, I am asking people to write down what worked, what didn't, and what changed. And those are called my note sections. And so it's a very practical, pragmatic book. I have recipes in there. It's a download of my brain. So the first section is divided, is focused on homeopathy, everything from how to set up your pantry to what's a food elimination diet and everything in between. But the second section, I created a section called Stages for Ages, from pre-pregnancy, pregnancy, infancy, childhood, and adolescence. The main issues, it's not a complete overall pediatric textbook, and the remedies that you would think about and how to create a home kit. And then my favorite stuff in the end, and I even put a chapter in here, how to help your child with COVID vaccine reaction, informed consent, and some stuff about that as well.
Well, I would love to get into that with you. So let's start with how to arrange your pantry. Is there what is your top line recommendation for what people should do there?
Yeah. So and when we've been talking about the book, I want to say that it's not so much about talking about this book. It's about what this book helps people solve. What are the problems it helps parents solve? And that's what I really wanted to focus on. And teaching people to resurrect what we once knew, even maybe not even our parents, our grandparents. And so this information is not like I created it. I'm bringing back stuff from Hippocrates, a couple thousand years old, but just resurrecting it. And whether we need to read it, go on YouTube, we need to relearn how to get in the kitchen. Ultra processed foods, and we do have to eat some processed foods like rice, meat. Chances are you're not butchering the cow in the backyard. There are some processed, but ultra processed foods, especially conventional ones, but organic too, are really the drivers of destroying our health. And 85% of the foods in the supermarket contain GMO ingredients if they're not organic, and their associated pesticides. So one of the things I do about setting up your pantry is I talk to parents about what is required to have in there, how you purchase it, how you shop for it, where you shop for it. Do you your local markets, CSAs, farmers markets? How do you do that? Some farmers markets, although they want to get rid of it now, and the federal government can take something called SNAP or EBT. It's called SNAP here in California. Well, they'll take your what we used to call food stamps. I hate food stamps. I like SNAP better, but they're looking to do away with SNAP here in California, literally as we speak. Oh, federally, not just California. And SNAP in farmers markets, you can get 2 to 1 on your SNAP credits if you have SNAP.
So your money goes twice as far at a farmer's market if you're on SNAP.
And like, for example, if you go to your farmer's market and you shop at the end of the day, they will often tell you bags of stuff, the imperfects. Nothing wrong with ugly fruit, folks, ugly veggies. They need a little cosmetic work. Sure, you can cut it off at really low prices. Farmers do not want to bring all that stuff home.
That is so true. I've run into that myself at farmers markets. So, Michelle Perro, tell me, our audience is very sophisticated with food, but what are some of the surprising things that are like very processed and very toxic for us that we wouldn't necessarily know?
Yeah, so some of the things that people might not recognize. I don't know if I should bring it up, but let me bring it up. Is infant formula, okay? Because I focus on parents. You and I are not drinking infant formula. Although when I was a resident at Bellevue, I was putting infant formula in my coffee. Just saying, it is milk. It's baby's first ultra processed food. So babies by 6 months, about half of moms are giving formula. Breast is best, but life happens. Now, there is something in breast milk called human milk oligosaccharides, and that's food for the microbes. There is a particular microbe that babies need called bifidobacteria. Mom makes the food for the bifido. 25% of babies have no bifido now. A paper just came out. I just nearly fell off my chair. That bifido is what keeps us young, by the way, and it's probably a good anti-aging organism. As we age, we lose bifido. Just saying for you A4M people out there.
And there's no bifidobacteria because of C-sections and lack of breastfeeding, would you say?
Glyphosate takes them out. There's glyphosate in infant formula, unless it's organic. So there is glyphosate. Unfortunately, COVID vaccine in a paper by Dr. Sabine Hazan been shown to eliminate bifidobacteria. And I'd say also microbes are very sensitive to emulsifiers. Emulsifiers, the baby might not be eating it or the child, but mom might if she's breastfeeding, like things like even peanut butter. They have emulsifiers. And what emulsifiers do is allow 2 things that don't get along to come together, like the peanut and the oil so that they don't separate, contain emulsifiers. It turns out emulsifiers are not good for your microbiome. They kill it off. And we have now a dearth of microbes. We need at least 700 to 800 species. Some of us don't even have 500 species. It's so pitiful. Now, what formula companies did, trying to make a good infant formula, is added a couple of human milk oligosaccharides, HMOs in there. But what people may not know is they are genetically engineered and they don't need to be labeled. So companies are adding these GMO, genetically engineered HMOs into breast milk, into infant formula. And babies are drinking this with no longitudinal data, no prospective studies, no human data. It's an unknown. They say there's no more GMO products in there. That's not true. They're not testing for it. You can get little DNA fragments rolling around in there that they're not even looking for. If you don't look for it, you don't find it.
Exactly. So that's true if you're getting an organic infant formula or a non-organic one.
So if they're adding HMOs, yes, it's going to be in both.
That's unbelievable. I don't think parents have any idea about that.
No, I read that and I went, are you kidding me? And then I had to go down the rabbit hole. I have rabbit hole-itis, and I have to say, is this true? Because I was actually glad to see HMOs in there thinking, okay, we're thinking feeding the bifido, God save the biff. But here we are, unidentified. That's one of the big things. I have a nonprofit, as you know, GMO Science, and I've been focused on GMOs and genetic engineering for 25 years. And the situation is not getting better. And so really educating eaters about this. The closer you stick to whole foods, whole unprocessed foods, fruits and veggies, meats, eggs, etc. If you're not, depending on what kind of diet you're on, the better off that you will be trying to just stay away from processed foods because that's where the GMOs live.
I vividly remember reading The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan, and he always said, don't eat what doesn't rot and don't eat what your grandmother wouldn't have eaten. And I think, that's generally really good advice these days.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm not saying it's easy, by the way. And I understand there's a cost of convenience. And you may not know, Alex, that 46% of American incomes are spent on eating out. And if you're eating out, even good restaurants, like high-end restaurants, are not using all organic, if any organic. And they have no impetus to label their menu as organic. I'm in a very crunchy part of Marin County where I live, and there are very few organic restaurants. As a matter of fact, I went to one last night, the only one I know in my area, and I go there a lot. So this is a problem. Eating out is a problem. I like eating out too, but I do it less and less because of the quality of the food.
Yeah, I know it. I went to one with Jeffrey Smith a while ago. Is it like an Asian restaurant that you're thinking of?
Well, we went to, I'll tell them, Lotus. I love those guys. They've been around for decades. They're a wonderful restaurant here locally in the Bay Area. They are organic, and the owner and his son works there now. I was there last night with a friend who also runs a podcast, and we were eating dinner there last night. And Jeffrey Smith and Jeffrey is my friend and colleague for many years. When we do a meetup, we go to Lotus for Indian food.
Okay. Yeah, that's where he took me then. Good guess.
Yes, you're right on it, Alex. Right on it.
We know so many of our listeners understand the relationship between health freedom and our personal and economic freedoms. It's the same principle. If you're one of our audience who's concerned about inflation, paper asset crises, and ongoing monetary crises, you may have already started accumulating gold and silver or are considering doing so. There's no gold dealer we know who's better positioned to serve the freedom community than Mish International in Menlo Park, California. I'm one of the many happy customers who's purchased gold or silver in their showroom, or I've had it delivered through their secure courier service. They are true veterans who are honest, fair, and reliable, and so knowledgeable regarding all the choices of gold and silver bars and coins to help you choose the products that fit your goals and your worldview. The principal, Robert Mish, is world-renowned for his expertise in rare coins as well. Write down this number, 650-324-9110. That's 650-324-9110. And visit mishinternational.com. That's MISH international.com to learn more about this notable company. So, Michelle Perro, we've talked about this destruction of the biome because of things like glyphosate and the ingredients in baby formula. And earlier in the episode, we talked about this gut-brain connection. Talk to me about the effects that this is having on children in their gut, in their brain, and elsewhere in their bodies.
Absolutely, Alex. So in the book, in my life, in my practice, in my work, in my own health, I focus on the microbiome. Why? It's responsible for several things. And in lieu of our conversation before about the gut-brain microbiome axis, it produces neurotransmitters. Those are chemicals that run brain function. Like, for example, the happy neurotransmitter, serotonin, the one that people with depression take SSRIs for to increase the serotonin. Ones like GABA, dopamine, that's the one that gets released every time you hit that like button on your social media, epinephrine, norepinephrine, etc. You do make some of these chemicals in your brain, but the majority are made by the microbes, not to mention even melatonin, which is necessary, for, as we all know, for sleep. Your pineal makes it, but so do the microbes.
Really?
And it's an antioxidant, and it supports your immune function. Melatonin is like so key, so key. So, 1. 2, it makes vitamins like vitamin K, vitamin B12, folate. And so these, especially these B vitamins, are needed to run brain function, particularly the B vitamins. It also it produces bifidobacteria in particular, but others as well, these compounds called short chain fatty acids, like butyric acid, propionic acid, valeric acid. And these little these little chemicals are actually needed for brain function. They also often cross the blood-brain barrier. And additionally, here's another microbiome, fun fact at the next trivia party, is that it's the first line against detoxification. Your main detox organ is your liver, but the first line is the microbiome.
Really?
Yes. So when the microbes are impaired for whatever reason, things go sideways. Now, they live in a kind of a homeostatic balance. It's not, we think of it as good and bad bugs, but they're actually, any good bug can become bad and bad bugs can become good. They kind of keep each other in check. And there are 5 categories of these microbes, and they all live harmoniously together or not so harmoniously. When one player gets out of control, you can start developing symptoms. What do those symptoms look like? IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, now impacting a huge number of Americans. Constipation, 1/3 of kids can't poop. No poop, no detox. Reflux, the number one medication over the counter, I think in America, are antacids. And when you're refluxing stomach acid, it can burn the esophagus, and chronic burning the esophagus is not a good thing. It can create all kinds of problems as adults, achalasia and esophageal cancers and other nasty things. You need stomach acid. We need stomach acid. We don't need it going up into our esophagus. And so reflux, and a lot of this happens because of the change in the microbes, decimation in the microbes, and they assist in protecting us from being leaky gut. There are these little soldiers called zonulin that kind of run through our intestine, and they tell these little gaps when to open, let nutrients through, when to close, keep pathogens out. So when these gates are not functioning well because of glyphosate is a big driver of this loss of microbes. Foods pass, pathogens pass, other things that we don't want in our bodies, toxic substances, plastics, etc., pass. And when your immune system, which is sitting on the other side of this thin epithelial layer, see these, for example, incomplete proteins, they mount an immune response. And that's known as chronic inflammation. And sometimes your immune system will join up with these toxic elements, toxicants, and they're called immunotoxicants, and these can trigger further immune issues. And so your body does everything it can to dispose of this stuff and deposit it. Where? Fatty tissues, like your fat. Your brain is a fatty tissue. So also, now that I just have to bring this up there because it's one of my pet peeves, we have an Ozempic GLP-1 agonist craze in America happening right now. Every other commercial on TV is about someone singing about GLP-1s, Ozempic, Wegovy, whatever. There are many. Well, gee, that's good. But fat is actually, if someone is overweight or obese, that fat is protective because you will often become obese to protect yourself from chronic toxicants that where your body is hiding them. When you drop this weight suddenly from taking your GLP-1 agonist, all of a sudden those toxins get released. And if your detox organs are not open, and I have a whole section in the book about it, and your detox organs are your gut, poop, your kidneys, pee, your lungs, breathe, your skin, sweat, and your brain, the lymphatics. And your lymphatics and glymphatics are one of your key detox mechanisms for clearing out a lot of these materials that are harmful to us. Now, all these systems can be overloaded. Your kidneys may not be working well. You're not pooping well. Even your breathing might be restricted. You're not sleeping well. So you become a toxic mess, and you're on a GLP-1, releasing all of them into your body after years of accumulation. So I talk about in the book a lot about the microbiome, how to detoxify, and where the toxins are coming from.
Wow, I don't think anybody understands that about rapid weight loss. And it makes total sense. If you're sequestering all those toxins in your fat and then you lose the weight and they go into circulation, you're going to have effects everywhere. And, what percent of people having rapid weight loss have kidney issues now?
That is an excellent question, and I don't know the answer about it because I am not prescribing anybody to be on a GLP-1 agonist. I appreciate the need to regulate our weight, and I totally support it. But it's not unknown. I mean, I just wrote a parent handout how parents should avoid this for kids, but it's easy to get a prescription for a GLP-1, and it is approved by Medicare. So anybody can get on these drugs. The problem is when you come off the drugs, and I don't know the kidney issue, and that's a good question, Alex, people often regain the weight back.
Right.
And they regain it back as fat because you lose about 30 to 40% of muscle with these GLP-1s. It's a, I don't know. It's not the solution. Would be not be my first choice solution to obesity.
Yeah, lifestyle changes are the solution, things that you can sustain over a lifetime. And it's just sad. I know a lot of people struggle with their weight, and I have not been one of them, but it is sad. I had the opposite problem when I was vaccine injured. I couldn't eat, and then everybody's mad at me, like, "Oh, it's so hard that you can't gain weight." I'm like, "No, it really is. It sucks because I feel nauseated when I eat."
Right. So, but these problems shouldn't be existing at all, that you can't eat at all or you're overeating, and we're overfed and undernourished. So our food is so nutrient poor because of what we've done to soil and the reduction. And GMOs are at least 20% lower nutrient levels in GMO foods, which are all the foods commonly that a lot of are in ultra processed foods and in children's diets. So we're eating more to try and compensate and receive more nutrition.
So you also talk about how to address this as kind of like your own family physician. Like you're the mom of the family, and it's usually the mom taking care of the kids. It could be the dad these days too. But what do you have to have on hand to help your children through all these issues? And what's the trigger point to go to somebody like you when you really should get professional help?
Yes. So, the first thing that everyone can do at home, moms, dads, grandmas, is reduce the toxic load. So there's nothing happening. There's no amount of homeopathy, herbal medicine, pharmaceuticals that I can throw at anyone if you're still in a toxic environment. And the toxicity must be first your food, your water, your air. So clean up your living space the best you can, and that will literally take the physical load off. If you can't carry the load, take some of the weight off. This is from the school of common sense, and so that would be step one. Number two is you sort of have to clean up your food supply. And that means switching to organic and preferably organic regenerative. And there are labels for that. And I have a section in the book about how to read labels. You have to avoid something called appeal, APEEL, or Organapeel. That is a Bill Gates supported product that allows that avocado, for example, to sit on a grocer's shelf for 3 months. Real food dies after a few days, folks. You shouldn't be able to eat an avocado after 3 months. So you want to avoid that too, because it has toxic stuff in there, toxic metals, certain fats, hexane. Not a good coating. Can't be washed off.
No, and that's on organic and non-organic, right?
Everything, yes, and Whole Foods carries it. I have a chart in the book which stores carry it and which ones don't, because you need to avoid that at all costs. So you clean up your food, you get a water filter, get the best that you can afford, that your budget can afford, whatever that is. If you're on a low income budget, maybe it's a carbon filter. If you have some funds, maybe you want to get a reverse osmosis system for your house. So you have to work within your means. I get it. There's a modicum of practicality here. And then I start talking about elimination diets. So if your child is struggling with especially neurocognitive issues, first thing that has to go are unfortunately gluten and dairy. And so we start doing elimination diets. I have food charts in here that people can use on how they eliminate the food, what worked, what didn't, and how to introduce them back. And I have some clinical cases. Talk about that. And then I talk about the 5 R's, how to really change and move through. That's from functional medicine education. That's where I borrow that, how you get back on track. Then I talk about specific situations, either whether you're on a omnivore diet, vegetarian diet, vegan diet. I have certain favorites for children. I have very favorites in general, but everyone is individual, and I support choice. It's, informed consent, risk benefits. Maybe you should be vegetarian. Maybe I should be a carnivore. It's individualized. So I don't give medical advice in the book, but I tell you how to kind of dance around all these things, because, for example, vegetarians and vegans, if they're not organic, they get a huge load of Roundup because they eat those foods that are sprayed heavily, like legumes. And legumes are sprayed with Roundup as a desiccant, a crop drying agent, off-label use. That's another thing. And then I go into a deep dive on glyphosate, because I've been spending most of my career learning about, this one particular herbicide. There are many. I don't want to see glyphosate being phased out and more toxic herbicides being phased in. That's not the point. But we created a whole farming system using GMOs only so that when you spray glyphosate-based herbicides, the crops don't die. So our farming system is based on that family of herbicides. And there are others, and there are more toxic ones, and there are more layered and stacked traits to support spraying. so that the crop doesn't die, but the weeds around it do. But the herbicide is killing everything, our microbiome and the soil microbiome, because they're antibiotics. Glyphosate's an antibiotic.
And besides eliminating as much glyphosate from your diet as possible by eating organic, are there ways to get rid of glyphosate?
Yeah. And so what I'd like to talk about is there's several ways to do it. So one is keeping your detox pathways open. Two is drinking a fair amount of filtered water. And I have all kinds of tricks to how to increase your water intake, and lemons, fruits, things you can do to increase water intake. Three is to include some apple cider vinegar in there. And unfortunately, my favorite one, Mrs. Bragg's, was purchased by Bill Gates and Katy Perry. I don't know how much they own. That's not my wheelhouse, but it always raises my alarms when I see that kind of stuff happening. But apple cider vinegar has a microbe in it called acetobacter. And that acetobacter will break down glyphosate to get the nitrogen and phosphorus out of it, because glyphosate is a synthetic amino acid. Amino acids are building blocks of proteins. Also, you can do some things like humic and fulvic acid. Just make sure they're not contaminated. Will also help eliminate glyphosate. Another favorite, and I tell folks how to do this, are detox baths. You can take a beautiful bath from a 2-year-old to a 92-year-old using some of my favorite elements like Epsom salts. You can use bentonite clay. You can use charcoal in there. You can use baking soda. You can use salts. And you can even put some essential oils in there. Careful with kids with essential oils, and I explain how to do it. And so baths and sweating. Whether you sweat naturally, go for a run. Kids should be sweating, people. You're doing infrared sauna. I got my little toaster sauna upstairs. I'm a big fan of saunas. But skin is a huge detox organ and helping it remove. So we're helping our body through our diet. And then, of course, I have a great recipe in here for a cilantro smoothie. Cilantro is one of your detox superstars. So I eat some cilantro every day, fresh cilantro. You could throw, and some people can't eat it because of the taste, soapy taste. You can throw a little bit in your kid's smoothie. It hides the taste.
Okay, those are all great recommendations. I want to just sit on each of those and talk about each of them. I know we don't have enough time. Can I go back to people starting the gluten-free and dairy-free diet just for a moment here before we start to talk about these issues in California? Do you tell families to take their child off of gluten and dairy at the same time, or do you do gluten first or dairy first, or do you have a decision-making matrix where you decide which one goes first?
It depends on their symptoms and what they're experiencing. So if they're having respiratory issues, let's say chronic asthma, I'll always pull dairy off first. Chronic ear infections, dairy, first to go. Goopy noses, chronic sinusitis, dairy, first one to go. If they're having neurocognitive challenges, anything like autistic spectrum disorder, if they're having chronic gut issues, even celiac-like issues, of course, or just I see dark circles under the eyes, I see certain hair quality, I'll start with gluten. I prefer to do one at a time so I know which one it is. But if somebody's severe enough, I take them off both. Ideally, if a parent can afford it, or if anyone can afford it, I like to look at food antibody testing. And there's a few labs that I use. They're in the book. People can even order them themselves, and I tell people how to do it. And some of those tests are just a finger stick. So you don't even have to go to the lab. You can literally do it at home, and you fill in little circles on a card and mail it in. Super easy. So I could actually see which foods you are sensitive to. Sometimes there are some real surprises. Like, what? Sensitive to kiwis? What? You can be surprised. So I love to do that, but testing is not always available, affordable, doable, practical. Kids don't want to get pricked. Adults don't want to take the time out. There's a cost involved. They run about $300. They're not cheap. Anywhere between $200 and $300. There's one lab I know it's $169. A great lab I know $299. They're kind of all over the map. And so I like data when I can get it. But also the physical exam gives me data. So I like to come off those foods for at least 4 weeks. 4 weeks. So one depends on the child. Severe enough, take them both off. And then see how they do. If you do it too short, it takes about 4 weeks to clear those antibodies. Those are those proteins that are making making an immune response against the food. Your body is seeing gluten or dairy or soy or peanuts as a foreign invader, and your body is mounting an immune response to literally attack it.
Yeah. And you have to give it a chance to calm down. But Michelle Perro, isn't there also like an addiction factor that is very unrecognized with gluten and dairy? Like there are gluteomorphins and caseomorphins that make you literally addicted to these things, and you have to break that addiction to actually be able to adhere to the diet, right?
100%. And so when these incompletely broken down gluten proteins cross into your bloodstream, gluteomorphins look just like morphine. You have these opioid receptors in your brain cross right up. They're small, 7 amino acids cross the blood-brain barrier, bind, you get an immune reaction. That's why you'll hear people say, "What? Give up bread? I love bread." And they're right. They do love bread. They're having a chemical addiction love affair with the bread based on what's happening in their body. I have seen families go through withdrawal, removing bread and dairy from the diet. I mean, literally physical withdrawal. And I have remedies. I have homeopathic remedies listed on how you deal with detox withdrawals because it's real. And it takes it takes about 2 weeks to get rid of the desire. Once you come off the gluten, all of a sudden you're no longer craving it. Those cookies pass in front of you and you're not going cookie. You're going, okay, cookie, you know? It doesn't become that. And remember, those sneaky companies are adding the pollutants into the foods to increase your desire to eat them. They know the ratios of which substances your brain is craving, salt, sugar, fat. They put it in those ratios so you desire more.
Oh yeah, I remember I did advertising for Procter and Gamble. It was my first job a long time ago, and they study that. That is a science. How to make it look, smell, and taste. And sometimes all that stuff is fake, the taste and the smell, for those purposes.
And so when you buy something with vanillin is genetically modified because we can't even get natural vanilla anymore because we've killed off all the bees. You need bees to pollinate vanilla plants. And so they've produced a genetically modified synthetic biology product of vanilla.
Wow. Wait, so even like the organic frontier, I think that's the name vanilla that I get, is GMO?
I don't know. It doesn't have to be labeled. You're going to have to ask them. Because now those substances, they're saying they're not genetically modified, but when in fact, indeed they are. If you see anything with synthetic biology on it or precision fermentation or anything like that, those are buzzwords for genetic modification.
So this idea, I want to go back to the gluten and dairy thing because when I was so sick after I got vaccine injured, I was physically disabled, brain damaged. I was 80% housebound. This is in my early 30s. This happened in the 1990s. The first big step out of my hellhole, my health hellhole, was going gluten-free. And half of my disabling symptoms went away. And it was so dramatic, I was able to go back and work part-time in high tech as a consultant. But I'm sure you've got really dramatic stories among your people too. Can you share like a couple of your really dramatic stories of the differences?
Yeah, certainly. I had a kid who I was working with autism, and the mom came in, and the mom had severe, debilitating asthma. I mean, the kind where she was walking around with an inhaler like next to her face. I mean, it was unbelievable. I've never seen asthma so severe, but the mom wasn't my patient, it was her kid. And so the kid had like an autistic spectrum issue. I took him off gluten and dairy. I said immediately. And what I told mom is the whole family does it. So I don't want you and dad and little Susie eating pizza and your little Johnny here is eating kale salad. That doesn't work. Everyone comes off gluten and dairy. Mom did it. In 3 days, I just swear to goodness, she was off her inhaler for the first time in 20 years.
Wow. Wow.
She called me. She called me on my phone. I used to give people my cell phone. She said, "Dr. Perro, you're not going to believe this." She said, "I didn't need my inhaler today." I said, "Where are you?" I thought she was like in the ER somewhere. She said, "I'm in my house." And I was like, oh, whoa, that was the quickest I've ever heard. But I have seen miracles. So if I've seen autistic kids with pretty severe, let's say, flapping, you may have seen that, or spinning, pretty severe. They come off gluten and dairy, and their symptoms are 50% better. And pretty quickly, within a week or two, just coming off gluten and dairy. That's how brain inflaming food can be. Food is chemistry. It's data. It's for our bodies. So if you don't think you are what you eat, but you are what your food ate. So it's both of those things. So it matters way more than Americans are led to believe. In Europe, you get that memo. Italians, the French, they're all about the food. And they're so food discerning. Here in the US, we're eating any old slop. How did that change? Because many of us have European descent. We come from that stock of snooty food people. There was a study, French kids were given American school lunches. And I did a school lunch thing. Oh my God, it's a long story. Anyway, they were given the wrapped in plastic chicken McNuggets which are not really food products, some nasty applesauce, ketchup was the fruit. And you could see in the movie the kids like qu'est-ce que c'est, pushing the food around the plate. They wouldn't even eat it.
Oh, they wouldn't eat it. I was wondering if they would eat it. I did not think that they would definitely not eat it because they're kids. They're hungry.
They wouldn't eat it. And in French schools, for example, they have hot lunches and they have like a 5-course meal ending with a cheese plate, a brie cheese plate. And this is what the French kids are eating. And the US kids are eating these little nasty chicken McNasties and food wrapped in plastic that gets microwaved and dripped into their food. Right? I mean, 30 million school lunches served a day. What are we doing to American children? We're feeding them that. And it literally is crap.
Yeah, and American kids, their palates don't know the difference. I mean, I brought up my kids really healthy. That was my one thing in my marriage. I was like, I'm going to feed my kids healthy no matter what. And I'm going to I'm going to wield this sword and I'll let everything else go. You know, they can, if my ex-husband now wants them to watch TV, I'll let him watch TV. But I was going to make sure they ate healthy. And, you know, Michelle Perro, when my kids were like 5, my son had American cheese for the first time at somebody's house. And he's a very expressive guy. And he just had it almost like a meltdown. He took a bite and he's like, what is this? This tastes like oil. And I said, well, you're right, actually. You know, American cheese is half oil and half cheese. And so he didn't even know what he was eating, but he figured out what was in it and he hated it.
And you know what happens is once you clean up your diet and then you do eat something like that, it tastes awful. So I had an M&M peanut back in the day when I didn't eat like I do now. I used to like M&M peanuts. I admit I came from that diet. I had one at a Halloween. We were doing walk through my neighborhood. I said, I'm going to try one M&M peanut. I literally had to spit it out. It tasted so bad because I don't do those foods. And there was a time, especially my young MD days, and we were up at 3 a.m. eating fries and junk food. Oh my gosh, it was awful. You know, I've come a long way. I too was on that American diet side, the SAD diet, standard American diet, and I call it now the HAD diet, happy American diet. And this is what we're all supposed to be eating. I don't see why it's such a fight. Well, I know why it's such a fight, because what we're fighting is big money, big lobby, big ag, big food, and big technology, because they want to technify our food in your neck of the woods. That's where it's driving from. And so this is what we're fighting.
That's so true. Well, and then we also know about the opiate addiction and the price factor. You know, these foods are subsidized and they're cheap and they're the worst foods for us.
Yes, correct. Organics are not subsidized, and all these commodity crops are subsidized. That's right. And the new farm bill that's coming out, you know, we've been writing about it. You know, so many of us, you know, Kelly Ryerson, Zen Honeycutt, so many of us are just reporting the farm bill, the farm bill, the farm bill. And, you know, they're all like giving it a pass, giving it a pass. I think there's one legislator, Massey, who was outspoken critic of the farm bill. We're literally fighting the hill is what we're doing. So while we're fighting the hill, I'm not saying don't fight the hill. We have to fight the hill, but we have to fight local and global. We have to do both ends, Alix. And that's why I love what you're doing. We're attacking both sides. You got to change your home, change your environment, change your school, your whatever, your community, and then go big.
Yeah. So speaking of California, Michelle Perro, what do you think of what's going on here in California, where parents literally don't have a choice about the vaccines they have to put into their children so they can access school here?
Frankly, nothing short of shocking. And I believe in parental ability to make choice, whether parents want vaccines, whether parents don't want vaccines. I don't believe in mandates. I no longer believe in the sanctity of vaccines. My own kids were vaccinated, but I stopped at a certain point when I realized what they were doing. I had a kind of a wake up moment with my own son when he was 12. And so then I stopped with my own kids. But however, let's talk about the present situation. Parents are handcuffed here. And so many parents have been forced to leave California. We had a huge exodus, particularly during COVID, when kids were getting mandated for the COVID vaccines. The worst idea ever. To me, that was the worst assault. Our American children have been assaulted. That was the worst. So to me, it's a travesty. I believe in choice. What we're fighting here is monumental. We've had so much harm by a pediatrician, Senator Pan, who I think is still is he still in Sacramento? Can't get rid of that guy. And not based on any of the data. The data's out there. And thank goodness for people like Aaron Siri and Del Bigtree and you and A Voice for Choice, Christina Hildebrand and Perk. So many courageous people out there trying to undo, and Bobby Kennedy. Thank you, Bobby. So trying to do the right thing. And we are being fought. And we're being fought by big organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics that receives all its funding from Pfizer, Moderna, Eli Lilly, Sanofi, etc., Merck, all the big vaccine manufacturers. So that's, there's so much going on there. But I do believe what we can do for American families is the religious exemption. If we can bring that back, and it's available in a lot of states, not here in California, at least have the exemption so that parents can have a religious exemption.
Definitely. There's actually, I know a lot about this because our case is going through the courts right now, and our case would end mandates entirely in California and beyond. But in the Ninth Circuit Court, actually, there are 4 religious exemption cases sitting together as a group waiting to be heard. And those decisions are going to be based on the First Amendment and the 14th Amendment. And our case, Rob Bonta's office has asked us to stop pushing our case forward and wait for the decision in those cases. And I think that he thinks that they'll be able to more easily rule against us at that time. But my attorneys think that they're going to rule in favor of the religious exemptions and get it back. And then it would be more likely they'd rule in favor of us and just get rid of mandates entirely. So we have to see how that plays out. It's very exciting, but courts are very, very slow.
Well, I worry about, I am not implying that judges are corrupt. However, they're also human and they also have affiliations and they also play golf. So I don't know what their leanings are and what influences they may have. We've not always had favorable, judge, rulings for us, but I do believe the tides are changing. And for example, we've had some successes with, UC schools accept religious exemptions now.
Yeah, that was because of a case filed by Children's Health Defense back when I was on the board of Children's Health Defense. And yeah, and just so everybody knows, we, under that name, we filed the cases against Piedmont Unified School District and LAUSD. And those were among the, I think, 3 total cases that stopped the COVID shot mandates that were going on for students in California. So the courts do work. I mean, we've proven the courts do work. It's long, it's expensive, but they do work. And that's the only thing we have in the blue states, right? In the red states, like Idaho, Leslie Manukian's bill for medical freedom passed. It wasn't easy, and now there's some pushback on it for children, believe it or not. But, that's being used in other red states. But in blue states, the courts are the only way we can go.
Yeah. And, people say, well, Michelle, why are you pushing so hard? Or was the problem? I said, watch the movie. I love Del Bigtree for having done the movie, An Inconvenient Study. If that study doesn't change your mind about vaccines, and in essence, if anyone hasn't watched that film, An Inconvenient Study, a documentary, they should, because it was an eye opener. There were studies that were precedent to that film, like from Dr. Paul Thomas and Dr. Brian Hooker. I think also, who else was on that study? James Lyons Wheeler, I believe, where they looked at Paul Thomas's practice and they found that children who were unvaccinated were significantly healthier than the vaccinated children. Then the partially vaccinated, a little bit healthier, and from the unvaccinated and the fully vaccinated, significantly healthier. Well, Del took that up a big notch, and he showed that in a huge number. I forgot how many kids were in the study, but it was a huge number that they looked at, thousands, and showed kids who were unvaccinated were significantly healthier, like in all categories. So I recommend anybody go watch that documentary, and you can see it for yourself. That's why the vaccines, unfortunately, are toxic. The concept of vaccines is not a bad idea. The way it's been corrupted is the bad idea. So they have to be shelved completely, rethought out if you want to think about priming immune systems, but not the way we're doing it.
That is a great point. Yeah, I mean, it was a magnanimous concept, but in practice, it is completely corrupted, totally toxic. So, Dr. Michelle Perro, it's been so great talking to you today. What would you like to leave our viewers with?
Alex, I like to say that I am not Dr. Doom and Gloom. I am an eternal optimist. I believe that parents, people, individuals, eaters, consumers, legislators, educators, advocates, policymakers, podcasters can change this. We can turn this around. We are greater in number. We have spending power. Women have tremendous spending power because women spend 85% of the household budgets are spent by women. So we gals are driving the economic tipping point. So I'd say let's manifest our power. Let's be in our power. Let's create the healthiest environment what we can. Remove the toxic load. Get to the root cause of it. Just changing your diet is excellent and moving the tipping point. But if you can, do one step more. Whether it's calling your legislators, going to Sacramento, going to your school board, going to your community centers, your town council, your local churches, whatever it is that is to you, see if you can up the notch, even if it's just emailing your local stores and or restaurants for that matter. So you become part of the solution. So I invite people to be change. It comes from the home. That's step one, from yourself, and then to your external world. And if we all did just a little bit, we'd make a lot.
I agree with that. And where can we find you and how can we support you, Dr. Michelle Perro?
Thank you. Of course, please buy my book on Amazon, Making Our Children Well. It is self-published. And that's number one. Look at my work on gmoscience.org. We started that nonprofit in 2014 to label GMOs. That's how we started. Myself, an amazing other physician and a lawyer. And I'm still going strong as the CEO. It's a 501c3. I have lots of information for parents on there. I run a podcast, The New MDs, once a month, just bringing these type of health-related topics, mothers, doctors, and scientists. And last but not least, you'll see my work coming up with Ruth Westreich, and we are doing an amazing project with Cure, with pastor-based Black communities and changing lives of underserved children across America.
Oh, that is fabulous. Wow. Well, Dr. Michelle Perro, I am a huge fangirl, and I can't wait for you to keep educating people. I think you have so much more still to give to people. I think you've got more books in you, and I really encourage everybody to read her new book, Making Our Children Well, and get educated for yourself, because you, as the parents of your children, are the ones who are in charge of their health. It's not the doctors and it's not the medical system. So thank you so much, Dr. Michelle Perro.
Thank you, Alex. A pleasure to be with you today.
Likewise. We are so happy to have as our prime sponsor, Mish International, Northern California's acclaimed specialists in rare coins and gold and silver investments. Our friend and supporter, Robert Mish, is the same principal that started the company back in 1963, and he's still there every day with 63 years of experience. He has integrity, reliability, and fair pricing, whether you're buying or selling. When you have business to do with precious metals, you'll always be treated well at Mish International. Call 650-324-9110 and tell Robert that Alex sent you.